Hello, I'm Elaine Hopkins, Director of the Minnesota Center for the Book, an affiliate of the Library of Congress. The Centers for the Book help carry out the mission of the National Center, which is to promote books, reading, libraries, and literacy nationwide. We also promote our state's literary heritage by putting a focus on books and authors with a connection to our states. Every year, as a part of our participation in the Library of Congress National Book Festival, we each choose a book with a local connection, the Great Reads from Great Places initiative. You can learn more at read.gov. Today, we're speaking with Great Reads authors from several states. They were invited by the affiliate centers for the book from Delaware, Maine, Minnesota, and Oklahoma. I'd like to thank my colleagues from those states in helping to put this program together. Here are our panelists, alphabetical by state and their books. From Delaware, we have John Miklos. He's the author of more than 50 books for children and young adult readers. His books include picture books, poetry, and nonfiction titles spanning a wide range of topics and from multiple ages. The Great Read selection from Delaware is John's book, Raindrops to Rainbow, illustrated by Charlene Chua. In simple rhyming text, Raindrops to Rainbow provides a color-focused story about a young girl who experiences a thunderstorm and learns that only after some rain can we enjoy the rainbow. From Maine, we have Suzanne Greenlaw, who's a citizen of the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians. A PhD candidate in the School of Forest Resources at the University of Maine, she works to restore Wabanaki stewardship practices throughout Maine. Gabriel Frey is a citizen of the Passamaquoddy Nation. He is an award-winning basket maker, artist, and cultural knowledge keeper. His mother and Suzanne and Gabriel's two daughters, Musquan and Alamusit, helped inspire this story. The Great Read selection from Maine is The First Blade of Sweetgrass by these two authors and illustrated by Nancy Baker. Musquan is excited to accompany her grandmother for the first time to pick grass for basket making, but she must learn to distinguish the sweetgrass they seek from other salt marsh grasses. Frustrated at first, she closes her eyes and lets the sun's warmth and the spirit and peace of the marsh fill her. She sees her ancestors gathering grass as they've done for centuries. At last, the bright emerald blades of sweetgrass stand out before her, inviting her to harvest them. But she remembers not to pick the first blade she sees, leaving it to grow for future generations. From Minnesota, we have Daniel Bernstrom. He's the author of One Day in the Eucalyptus Tree and Gator, 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 in addition to Big Papa and the Time Machine. He has a Master of Fine Arts in Writing for Children and Young Adults from Hamline University and lives in Worthington, Minnesota, where he is an English instructor. The Great Read selection from Minnesota is Daniel's book, Big Papa and the Time Machine, illustrated by Shane Evans. Big Papa's grandson is not feeling like going to school. He's feeling scared, so they hop in Big Papa's time machine to learn about all the ways a person can be brave. The dreamlike images from Big Papa's life explore crucial moments of African American history, happy and sad, inviting the young and old to share their stories of courage across time. And from Oklahoma, we have Barbara Lowell. She writes nonfiction and historical fiction picture books, nonfiction early readers, and nonfiction educational market books for reluctant readers. Her books include Sparky and Spike, Charles Schultz and the Wildest, Smartest Dog Ever, Alexander Hamilton, American Hero, and Daring Amelia. The Great Read selection from Oklahoma is her book, My Mastodon. Sibylla Peel lives with her large artistic family at America's first natural history museum. One day, she helps her papa and a big brother assemble the bones of a magnificent mastodon. She soon starts visiting her fossilized friend for regular tea parties and chats. But then her mastodon is invited to tour Europe and she's heartbroken. Will Sibylla be content to share her best friend with the world? Well, we are very, very excited to share some more about these books with all of you and would like to thank all of our panelists for being a part of the program today. So to get started, we thought we would begin with the Library of Congress National Book Festival theme, which is Open a Book, Open the World. And we'd love to hear what that means to you. could go in any different direction. What book opened the world for you? How do you hope your book will open a world for young readers? And to be fair here, we'll go alphabetical by state, and I'm going to ask John to start us off.
Thank you for that question. Books really do expose young readers to new worlds, new ideas, new possibilities. And some of the books that inspired me growing up were the Wizard of Oz series by L. Frank Baum. I really loved the imagination and the new worlds that were presented there. Also, very influential books to me included books by Dr. Seuss, such as The Cat in the Hat, Green Eggs and Ham, and The Sneetches. I love the rhythm, the rhyme, and the wordplay. And I try to incorporate some of those elements in my own books as well. And speaking of my own books, in terms of the book Raindrops to Rainbow, I hope that the way that it opens young children's eyes to the world and opens new worlds to them is by showing them the power of patience, that we do indeed have to go through the rain before we can experience the beauty of a rainbow.
Thank you so much, John. I love that last image too. Suzanne and Gabriel, do you want to talk to us a little bit about this theme of opening a book and opening the world?
Yeah, just to echo a little bit of what John said, I think that it's pretty powerful, the effect that books have on experiencing all kinds of different worlds. And for us, there is a little bit of a theme in that same sort of experiencing patience. Muskwan has to sort of like learn patience in being with her environment. I think that's an interesting lesson in experiencing sort of like your natural world and how you interact with it. For me personally, The Hobbit was a big one for me to experience the idea of a different world and different perspectives, as well as in my teen years, Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. Do you have any?
No, I think, no.
Thank you both. As the mother of a 5- and 7-year-old, I really like the theme around patience, and I think I'm going to have to be getting these books from the library to add to our reading list. Daniel, what would you like to share about this theme?
Well, I was just thinking about opening a book and opening a world, and I picked up Lisa Cron's book, Story Genius, and it's true. She goes into the brain science of when you are immersed into a story, you actually start to physically feel. So it's more than just empathy. A good book literally brings you into that character, their mind, their feelings, their situations, which is why diverse books are so important and why publishing these diverse books are really important, because it's helping children to walk in the shoes of someone else that they're unfamiliar with. You know, what a beautiful story about Muskwan and finding sweetgrass and walking through that. It's not just opening a world. It's weird. It's like dreaming, where the child actually starts to experience, or depending on how the writer wrote it, they could actually be Muskwan, or they could be the little boy and Big Pop in the Time Machine. And anyway, so as you all were talking, it made me think of, yes, it's when you do open a book, you enter through some magical way into a story, and how important that is. A book, so many. We mentioned The Hobbit, but I'm gonna keep with J.R.R. Tolkien. It was The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, and I remember I was in 4th grade and there was a reading contest, and I was like, oh, I'm going to beat everyone else by picking up this big book. So I went, found the biggest book in the children's library, and when I hit, I think it was Lothlorien or Rivendell. So Tolkien describes these beautiful cities, these beautiful elvish cities, and I was gone. I was completely somewhere else. And when I got done to the end, I was so thankful there was another book, not only because I could dominate my classmates, and I won that reading contest, but I didn't want it to end. I wanted to stay there in that world for so long. For my book, as I said before, I really want people to be immersed into this idea of African-American storytelling, the stories that my papa told me, and to learn about bravery through a different culture. And it might touch our cultures, but to walk in his shoes, and almost like me, he would tell me the story and I would sit beside him, and how it changed me. I hope that opening the book will open kids' worlds and change their lives as well.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm a huge fan of rereading books, and part of it is that being able to go back into a world or an experience that you really did live through as you were reading. So thank you. Barbara, what does this question mean to you?
I think that when we read books about other cultures and different countries, that we experience what it's like to have, or to currently, or to have lived in those countries and those cultures. And I think it helps us to understand that people are more alike us than they are different. And the book that really opened the world to me was one I read as a child, which was All of the Kind Family by Sidney Taylor. And it's about 5 little girls and their family growing up in the Lower East Side of New York City in the early 1900s. And as I became, reading the book, I became part of their family, and I experienced their joys and their disappointments and their excitement about the world around them. And it also opened up a world of historical fiction to me. And I started reading more historical fiction and more history as a child, and lots of biographies. And it helped me learn about how to live my life. And I think my book is about a 4-year-old child, and she lives in a natural history museum. And so you can experience what it's like to live in one, and what it's like to put the bones of a mastodon together. And how I think also what's really important is that the book is about family, and that how even if you're 4 years old, you can put your brother, even though he's bossy, ahead of you, his feelings ahead of you, and give up your mastodon, even if it's for, as she says, a little while, because she knows he'll come back, but that she could put her brother ahead of herself. And also, I think when you're a little child, that it's okay to feel like your stuffed toy is real to you, or that an inanimate object like the mastodon is real, and it has feelings, and you have close feelings to it.
Thank you so much, Barbara. You've all touched on this maybe a little bit, and we heard some in the descriptions of the books and the bios about the inspiration for all of these great reads. And so I would love to have all of you respond to what was that spark? What was the initial inspiration or the reason you really wanted to write this book? And maybe also why a picture book? And so I'm gonna ask Suzanne and Gabriel, would you start us off with that one?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that question. For us, I think that actually the spark came from being asked to write the book. Our editor saw an article about my academic research surrounding sweetgrass and restoring sweetgrass harvesting in Acadia National Park. And in his email was like, do you have a children's story in that research? And it was a really interesting ask. I've never been asked that before. And so Gabe and I worked together a lot, and I was like, what do you think? Is there a kid's story there? And for us, this is a very personal story. Even when you were reading the description, we were having a hard time not to cry. I know it's so personal for us. This is a story of our community, of our culture, of our family. You know, Gabe grew up with his mother picking sweetgrass at a young age. His mother learned from her great grandmother. So it's this generational knowledge and practice. And we wanted to write a story that our community felt proud about, but also was elevated enough for people to read, and that story could be shared with everybody else. This practice is one of beauty and care, and we wanted to share those sort of ethics with the world. And I think that our community and Gabe's mother feels really proud of this book as well. So that community approval has really been really wonderful.
Marvelous. I love the genesis of that, and certainly the threads of family and community. And just as Daniel is from Minnesota and shares the state, I know maybe a little bit more about the background there. And I know that family was perhaps an important element for you in the inspiration for Big Papa. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So I was adopted at a very young age, and I met my biological family years later. And the first people that I met were Papa and Nana. And growing up with kind of like cultural, so growing up in a white culture with very few, well, I had one Black friend in elementary school, and then none throughout my entire time, throughout the rest of high school, and which inspired me to write, because there weren't very many books for kids like me, and I was always picked out, and I was always the one. Anyway, when I finally met my birth family, it was Papa who shared with me my family story. So the stories in Big Papa and the Time Machine are true. I like that based on a true story, how important and true and necessary that is. So Papa would drive me around Chicago, and he would tell me these stories, and he didn't graduate from high school. I don't think he didn't even graduate from middle school. He dropped out to work, and so his education was very limited, and he was a brick mason in Chicago, building Chicago. And he'd tell me the different buildings he worked on, and he would tell me these stories, and very much like African-American culture, passing them down through oral storytelling. And I talked to my dad about it later when he read the book, and he said, I don't remember Dad telling me those stories. And then he was glad that they were written down for him, because they would have been lost. And so I remember the stories that Papa would tell me, but then he wasn't doing well. And then I realized what I would lose. So we would call every week, and he would just tell me stories, and I would just write them down. And I even had them recorded, and I'm trying to find the recordings, but I would record his voice, and I would just write as he was talking. And that's how the story of Big Papa and the Time Machine came about.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing that family history and story with us. Barbara, how did My Mastodon come to be?
Well, I learned about Charles Willson Peale when I was writing a different manuscript. And then when I started researching him and his family, I discovered that they lived in a natural history museum. And I love natural history museums. And I visited my first one when I was a little kid, and it was the Museum of Natural History in New York City. And I just fell in love with it. And I just imagined what that would be like. I mean, I would have loved to, or still, live in a natural history museum where I could visit all the exhibits whenever I want. And so I knew, I really wanted to write about the family. And it's a picture book because I write picture books primarily. And so it isn't that I look at the research and then decide, should it be middle grade or YA or nonfiction or whatever, but I look at the research and then decide the focus for a picture book. And the focus was on Sibylla, who was a real person, and she was 4 years old at the time, which is the perfect age for a young child's picture book. And so that's why I decided to write it. And it was a lot of fun. And I love doing research, and I love history, and I would love to go in a time machine. Really, I think that would be great. So I'll have to look through your book, Danielle. It sounds wonderful. And I also, just to say that I think it's so important that there's such a focus now on writing, publishing more books from, I don't like all the lingo, but from African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans. I think that it's so wonderful. And I know a woman who is a Cherokee who writes now books about Cherokees. And she said when she was growing up, like you, Daniel, there weren't books that were about her. And so it's so important that now children can have those.
Thanks so much, Barbara. I think I hadn't realized until you all started talking and describing the inspiration in your work, really how strong that theme of based on a true story really is throughout all of these books. But we'll let you bring it home, John, if you want to talk to us a little bit about your book and how it came to be.
Well, I find that the books that work best for me, the ones that I'm really happiest with, are the ones that kind of almost come out of nowhere through like a stroke of inspiration. And I've had a couple of these come at writers' retreats in the mountains of Pennsylvania. And my first one was One Leaf, Two Leaf, Count With Me, about leaves on a tree and the seasons. And Raindrops to Rainbow came to me in the same way. It was a rainy day in the cabin, and as I listened to the rain rap, rap, rap down on the roof of the cabin, a line popped into my head. Flip, plop, flip, plop, flip, flip, plop. Will these raindrops ever stop? Kind of from that, I said, oh, I like that. I can do something with that, but I didn't know what. And kind of over the course of the next 24 hours or so, a manuscript kind of roughed itself out of a little girl who was disappointed because she wanted to, it somehow became a color-oriented book because she was looking for blue skies and yellow sun, but instead she got gray clouds and frightening white lightning and other colors that worked their way into the book. And then, of course, the rainbow at the end with all of the rainbow colors. And I knew it had to be a picture book because the message was aimed at preschoolers and primary students. So a picture book was most appropriate. Plus, I knew that the rainbow theme, the artwork would definitely have to be something that would help carry the book. And that proved to be very true. The bright, bold, beautiful illustrations by Charlene Chua, Toronto, Canada, really do carry the story along. And I've always felt that the most effective picture books are one that are really kind of a true marriage of words and pictures. And I felt that I've been fortunate enough that was really the case with the picture books that I've done, and kind of especially with this one.
Thank you so much, John. I love that idea of the line that's just in your head, and it's going to stay there until you can create something with it. Thank you. So we've touched on a little bit. All of you have shared a bit about this in a way, but this next question, I'd love to open it up to the whole group. We've talked about the importance of representation and diversity in children's literature, and there's that, absolutely. And how else do you think that books for young people can help them cope with the important issues that we're facing right now? And I'll let you just sort of think about that, and please jump in if you've got any ideas that speak to that question.
I think there are two main things that come to my mind, and one is not feeling alone, and that you can live through the characters in the book and realize that you experience those emotions too, and you are not different, really different. And also there are books that are about mental illness, like Challenger Deep, and books about children who are autistic. And I think they're so important because they can realize that there are other children that are like that and learn how to negotiate their life better through books. And then another thing that's so important is empathy, that you learn through living the character's story, that you feel their feelings, you understand their emotions, and that helps you feel empathy in your own life. And that if you didn't read books, you might, and you didn't feel empathy, I mean, you didn't experience other people outside your limited world, you might not feel that for other people. And it's so important in our world. So I think during the pandemic that books really helped people, because they were, when they were missing their regular connections in their lives, they could read about characters that were experiencing things that they might be feeling. So I mean, books to me are everything, you know. I just grew up on books. I read books all the time. I love them.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'd like to pick up on that theme of books kind of getting us through the pandemic. I think part of that is just the idea of being able to see the world through the eyes of others and the experiences of others. And in my case, with the book Raindrops to Rainbow, it's kind of about patience and it's about hope. And I wasn't thinking of this obviously when I wrote it because it was pre-pandemic, but it seems like that's really a message that I think resonates with children and adults today. We've been under this cloud of the pandemic for a year and a half now, and I think we are all kind of hoping and praying for that rainbow when we come out into greater days in a more normal world.
Yeah, I think it's that sort of like connection of being able to see through the eyes of others, but then I think there's also an importance of similar to Daniel's book, is like being able to see yourself represented in an authentic way also has a strong resonance. Before we wrote our book, there was this sort of like, we had read several and searched several books that represented Native American kids in a first person voice that sort of like resonated in an authentic way, and I found it very difficult to find. So I think there is something that's incredibly important about being able to see others and empathize with others, but then also see a reflection of yourself in an authentic way.
Also, in our book as well, is Muskwin is facing challenges and frustration, and so she has to learn to work through those. But so in our culture, it would the grandmother tells Muskwin to relax, or kind of, she shouldn't say relax, but to think through it. My grandmother's here with you, the ancestors are here with you. And so that would be something that people would say. Like, the story we created was one where we imagined Gabe's mom and our daughter together, and everything that was said was things that had already been said before. So this idea, though, is this idea of finding peace within yourself, not having our cultural sort of context to support that self reflection to find her peace. I think that's a good story for kids working through the pandemic, knowing that there are many ways to self-soothe. I'm not sure that's the right term, but to work through things and to know that people are here to support you. I think it's a good message.
And I'm going to launch off of that. And sorry if I'm going to, as the academic, I have all these books and they're just here. So I'm going to read from Lisa Kron that says exactly that. She says, "Story was the world's first virtual reality. It allowed us to step out of the present and envision the future so we could plan for that thing that has always scared us more than anything, the unknown, the unexpected. That's why opening a book, just everything there. Even though the child might not have experienced a pandemic, or even though the child might not have experienced a tiger running at them, or like, well, I mean, I write a book about a boy being eaten by a snake, and it's like, well, should you have really written that story? Because that a child got eaten. And I said, no, it's not about a child being eaten. It's about when a child falls into darkness and they don't know what to do. What are they going to do to get out? So that's, I think of Corey Dorfeld in her book, The Rabbit Listened, about emotions and understanding my emotions. And if I'm upset, sometimes it's okay to be by myself. It's okay to go through the stages of grief. Not just cultural diversity, not just age diversity, mental health, all that, but just preparing children for just life.
That is a pretty massive undertaking, and I have to say that I am very, very glad that we have books like all of yours and many others to help us process with our children and with our communities. So as a non-writer but a voracious reader and parent, I'm grateful for all of the work that you all do. Along those lines too, and I might put you on the spot, Daniel, as our resident teacher here. How do you share messages with children who might be interested in being writers or illustrators themselves? Do you, I don't know if I want to say words of advice, or how do you talk to young people about sort of their potential in telling their own stories?
Yeah, when I was in second grade, I pushed over the Christmas tree because I was mad at my mom. And I tell kids that, and they're like, "You did what? You pushed over the Christmas tree?" And I said, "Oh, I've never written about it." "Wow, I want to hear more about that." I tell them, tell the stories that you know. Tell the stories from your own life. Exactly. What's been talked about here. I'm so glad, and forgive me because I can't pronounce your names, or and maybe they'd be great for you guys to jump in next, but finding Native American stories, looking for things that were close to you, things that you cared about deeply. And first time authors, am I correct? Hey, jump in and help me answer this.
Yeah, for sure. I do a little talk at our local school, and brought the book and let the kids sort of like look through it. And one of the kids just started asking me all of these questions about the book and about why I wrote it and all of this stuff. And I was like, well, it's about my family and da-da-da. And then he started talking about how his grandmother was a painter and how his mother was a painter and how he likes to draw. And it's like, yes, this is exactly the same sort of thing. It's cultural knowledge that's being passed down. And and so it wound up sort of evolving into like him being able to take that concept of like, this is something that I know, that I can talk about, that is important to me, and it's interesting. And if it's interesting to me, then, so yeah, I think it is. It's that fascinating, like being able to connect with your story.
Each individual life is so different, and we have different lenses. We could look at the same event, but we're going to look at it differently just because of our cultural knowledge and background. So when I tell kids, I say, you see life differently. You've lived your own life, and you have stories to tell, and we need to hear those stories. And I took first grade. I had to repeat first grade because I couldn't read. So please, just if you want to tell a story, just try telling it, and we're waiting for it.
kind of in a similar vein, when I go into schools and work with kids, especially when I do writing workshops with students, I tell them to tell their own stories. I tell them to write about what they're passionate about and what really matters to them. And that if they feel that strongly about that, it will come across to the reader as well. And I also talk to them about kind of following their dreams, whatever the dreams may be and wherever they may lead them. And I tell them about how I wrote my first story when I was in second grade. It's called Tubby the Pig on the Moon, about a talking pig and his barnyard friends who built a rocket ship and flew to the moon. And I kind of told them, that was, a story that I wrote as a second grader. And but even then I knew that I wanted to be a writer, and I kind of built from that. And I practiced and continued to grow my craft over years and years. And I was able to see my dream come true. And I encourage them to pursue theirs, whatever it might be, especially if it's writing or illustrating.
Well, when I first write a story, it's my first draft, and that is just the beginning. And I think a lot of children feel they write down the story and they got the story. But I have to go back and revise and revise and revise, and also play with the story. So I might write it first in first person and then change it to third person, or I might write it in present, then change it to past. And what's wonderful now is you have a computer, and so you can cut and paste things, move things around. So I think what's really important is not feel like I have to get this story done, but that you can play with it for a while. And so, Sibylla, my Mastodon, that was one of the very first things I ever wrote, but it was very, very different. And that was in 2006, and it came out last year. So it took a long, long time for me to get it almost right. But then I still had to work on it. So it just isn't something that comes to you and you know how to do it and you just do it and it's brilliant. It's something you need to learn. So don't be hard on yourself. Give yourself an opportunity to have fun with it and play with it and enjoy it. And I think that's really important for all writers to enjoy the process. And I do. But I can write some still very bad things. I do. But then I people will tell me that, and that's right. Now try something else. So don't be hard on yourself. And the most important thing to me is just enjoy it.
This is wonderful. These are fantastic insights, and I love that we're getting this glimpse of how you all are approaching your work and really the impact of that work and what it can be for young readers particularly. So just here as we're getting toward the end, I'd love to just open it up for all of you. If there is something that you'd like to share about your work or your process that you haven't had the opportunity to speak about yet, what you're working on now or what's next for you, just a kind of a bit of a round robin there of any last ideas or thoughts you'd like to share.
I have a book coming out. It was supposed to come out this month, but it was pushed back, and they finally signed an illustrator, so it comes out in 2 years. And I can't say what it is because it hasn't been announced, but it's funny. And I love to write funny, but I don't always. Most of the time I don't, but it's really funny. And it's about this child who you will know who his father is, but this child who grew up in this special place and was a real mischievous kid. So. And then I'm working on, my focus pretty much now is to write about children and that do different things that other children would be interested in. So I always love when I find that rather than writing about adults. True, either real kids, not just made up kids. But anyway.
I find it fascinating, like through this process of telling this one story, we started really talking about all of the different aspects of our culture, and all of these other stories started bubbling up out of that were going to be part of this story. And we're like, well, this is a separate story in and of itself. And then it went in this, so we wound up with like 5 different stories that were just branches of this one, talking about our culture and the connections and the lessons that we've learned through cultural teachings. And so, yeah, the same way, I feel like there's like this one finished book, and then this half finished manuscript, and then this skeleton structure over here, and then this concept down there. And it's this series of like all of this stuff where we hadn't considered it before, but looking at it, we're like, oh my God, there's so much there.
Yeah, we've been bitten. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, and then what we love is this sort of taking a lot of our cultural teachings and incorporating those, but in a modern way, or like what a child would feel today, which I think is really applicable to all children, right? Feelings of frustrations or whatever their challenges are, and how would somebody in our community, how an adult kind of help to navigate that, or how a child would navigate that. That is really exciting to us, I think. And those are kind of where we're moving forward into.
I have several projects that I'm working on. I do a lot of nonfiction and a lot of history, and I have 4 history-related books that will be coming out within the next year. One relates to the Revolutionary War, one to the Civil War, one to the Lewis and Clark expedition, and one to the race to the to be the first to the Antarctic, which reached the South Pole. And then I have 3 picture books that I'm working on as well. But I don't want to talk too much about them because they're in kind of different stages. I feel like I jinx them if I say too much where they get too far along. But kind of the final thought that I'd like to add from my perspective kind of loops back to the idea of opening worlds through books. And one of the best things that I ever heard at an education convention one time was a speaker said, and I wish I could remember who the speaker was so that I could credit them, but they said that introducing children to books is like dropping a pebble in a pond. You never know where the ripples will extend to. And I kind of love that thought about what we do as authors. We're dropping pebbles in the pond. And the more books that we can expose young people to, we never know which is going to be the book that catches them, the book that speaks to them, the book that opens the world to them and makes them want to read another book, another, and another, and become a reader for life. And that to me is the magic of writing and the magic of reading.
How in the world can you have 4 books coming? Like, I'm in awe. I'm just in complete awe. My word. I think I wrote 18 picture books this past spring. Just tried to come up with like ideas and stuff, and maybe one of them is gonna come out. So, oh, way to go. It's so my process is literally just write everything. So if it comes up, I'm gonna write it down. And I like what Barbara said, just play. An advisor and not now dear friend Phyllis Root told me about that. She said, play in the sandbox with your book. No, it's a weird kind of idea, but I try to approach it like that. Just play with these words, play with these ideas, and don't worry if anything is going to happen. And yeah, and thank you, John, for dropping pebbles and changing students, changing kids, giving books that they'll want to read to their children for years later. And I think that's why we do what we do. And I hope that I can keep that I have the privilege to keep dropping pebbles in there and opening up different worlds for kids to explore.
I know we do really important work, don't we? It's one, I mean, it's a joy and it's wonderful.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you all so very much. And I'd like to say on behalf of our state centers, and particularly Delaware, Maine, Minnesota, and Oklahoma, that it really is our honor and privilege to be able to use this Great Reads initiative to share your work with the whole country. I am really excited to look up more of your books myself, and am really thrilled at how many works are out there in the future that readers are going to be able to share. So these stories and insights and your perspectives have been just fascinating and fun and wonderful. So thank you very much. And we'll look forward to another opportunity to read your work and speak with you again. Thank you.